I'm Pedro Rodriguez. I'm a journalism fellow here at the Daily Signal, and I'm here with Danielle Martino from the Manhattan Institute. And we're going to expose a little bit about the Marxist nightmare that appears to be taking over American politics. Daniel?
Thank you for having me, Pedro.
Thank you for being here. So I wanted to discuss a little bit about, we have this problem which people like us literally sacrifice everything to move to a country that embraces capitalism, freedom, democracy, that really stands by its constitution and really gives opportunity to absolutely everybody, no matter what race, background, or socioeconomic status class you come from. And now it is being replaced slowly by this communist Marxist ideology. People who have never experienced communism think Marxism is a good thing. And they're trying to instill that idea and those principles here in the United States. And it's not an issue that a lot of people are going to say that this is an issue we are overblowing. It is definitely not. I mean, come this November, we might have 12 new Democratic Socialists being sworn into the House of Representatives. That marks a good amount, probably 1/5 of the House Democratic Caucus will officially be Democratic Socialist. We might actually have Democratic Socialists other than Bernie Sanders in the United States Senate. And this could foreshadow what is to come in the years to come in the next presidential administration in society as a whole here in the United States. So I want to shed a little bit about light about that. What are your thoughts?
That, honestly, I never thought that the socialists would get this far, how far they've already gotten. And I think that the greatest catalyst that they had to win, also for some context, both Pedro and I are from Venezuela, are Venezuelan, and so we lived through this. And I never thought that it would get this far with so many people getting elected. And I think it was Mamdani that was the catalyst. I think Mamdani's mayoral election in New York City really lit the fire on the DSA around the country to saying, yes, we can win in the primary. And if we win in the primary in a deep blue seat, we have guaranteed the general. And that is their strategy. Their strategy is going to be to take over the Democratic Party, because the average Democrat has nothing really in common with the DSA. They actually, I would say, have much more in common with the average conservative than with the DSA. The DSA does not believe in private property as a concept, right? They don't believe in having a police force. They don't believe in even having the regular constitutional order we have of Congress and the presidency and the Supreme Court. And that is not what any average voter believes in. But they will just lie to voters to get in power, which is exactly what they did in Venezuela, which is why our experience in Venezuela is so important, because what they want to do here is what they did in Venezuela. It's not what they did in the Soviet Union, because in the Soviet Union, Lenin never won an election. But Chavez did win an election lying to voters in Venezuela.
Right. And you said this the other day. This is kind of Mamdani and his class of DSA are duping American voters into thinking that they're going to vote for maybe a system that, prioritizes free healthcare like Norway or Sweden or some type of Eastern European country. But in reality, we both know that they're not voting for Norway. They're actually voting for Venezuela, and they're just being lied to. And that's something that I definitely want to focus on is Zoran Mamdani, the mayor of New York City. My understanding is that you live there.
No, well, I live in New Jersey, but I'm right next to New York City. But thankfully outside his jurisdiction.
Well, good.
He cannot send the police for me.
Not yet. Not
yet.
Mickey Sherrill is unfortunately heading in that direction too. But when we go to the issue of New York City, we see him implementing this new tax on wealthy property owners, and he's putting their information out there. And then he's instilling all of these rent control tactics. And, for the average American voter, rent control seems like a fairly good idea, especially in a city like New York City, where it is hard for, the median average rent in New York City is higher than the rest of the country.
Of course.
And that's the reality. So for them, this seems like a good idea. But what will ultimately happen is that landlords will not be able to pay for their buildings, right? They would have to put the building into foreclosure. The government would later seize the building. And then the
Right.
building would be government owned,
Right.
and it'll be, part of the free government housing that Zoran wants to implement. Now, what we see here is this is not a rent control tactic. And this is something that even a lot of conservatives like us get wrong. People think this is just, a failed economic policy, but it's not. This is the government wanting to seize property.
Yes,
And this is their
exactly, Pedro.
strategy.
You nailed it so well. People say that this doesn't work. Yeah, it doesn't work to make us more prosperous and have a better life. That's true. It makes us poorer. It reduces housing supply. It destroys the quality of the buildings. But that's misunderstanding their goal. Socialism does work to empower the government, to empower the politician, and in this case, to seize property, right? What's the goal of the rent control policy? So that we understand the lay of the land, this only affects 1/4 of buildings in New York that are already rent stabilized. The other 3/4 are not affected by the rent freeze. Those are fine. And they will keep going up in price because there is no incentive to build new buildings, because if you do, they put all these affordable housing mandates, they have all these union mandates, they have all these green mandates. You can't have gas kitchens anymore, for example. It's illegal. Even the current people who have gas kitchens have to change their gas kitchens now. They cut off their gas. I know people who they lost their kitchen and they have to spend thousands upon thousands of dollars. So anyway, there is no incentive to build new housing. Among the 1/4 of apartments that are rent stabilized, many of them are underwater, meaning the property tax liability and the maintenance of the building, the HOA fees, everything, is higher than the rent payment. And so what do you expect the owner to do? Many owners are providing it at a loss. They're putting from their own money. And they're doing it because they expect that in the future, the rent control will be repealed. But if the rent freeze is maintained for the 4 years of Mamdani, and then if he gets reelected and or the next mayor expands it for 4 more years, most of these buildings are going to go broke. They can't pay their property tax. And what happens when you don't pay property taxes, Pedro? The government takes your house. Of course. And that, by the way, that's the case in every part of the United States. What's Mamdani saying he's going to do? When the government takes it over, they're going to give it to nonprofits. Who runs the nonprofits? It's all of his friends. He's going to give it to the nonprofits that DSA people run, so that then they can use it to do whatever they want. It's really a robbery, a highway robbery, as we would say. And so that's on the rent control part. Then you also didn't mention the part of government grocery stores. He's planning to open government grocery stores. The first one that initially was going to be for a whooping $30 million is now for $70 million, one grocery store. Somebody mentioned that that's enough to pay for every New Yorker to have a Costco membership, which is kind of funny, right? You know that the government is not going to run the grocery store well. They said that it's going to be 30% off regular market prices. And so what do you expect people to do? They're just going to resell it. And they already announced that you're going to have a rationing system with an ID card to buy groceries. And people, on the right came with the reaction that, so you will need ID to buy groceries, but not to vote. And I know that's kind of like a funny response, but it's actually not the right response. Yes, you should need ID to vote, and you should not need ID to buy food, okay? That's a different thing, and I don't want to have it be the same. I want no ID to buy food,
Yeah, and the when it comes to the voter ID argument and the Jim Crow 2.0, they're kind of picking and choosing when to use a voter ID, right? We see the Democrats, they enforce voter ID for their own rallies. Now the Democratic grocery stores and everything of the sort. But when it comes to voting, it's racist, right? And it's just very counterproductive. But, another thing that I kind of wanted to stress on something that you were just talking about is when it comes to these government-run grocery stores, we're not playing the tape till the very end. I never experienced government-run grocery stores because I was granted the opportunity to leave communism at a very young age. But when it comes to the end of government-run grocery stores, there's no food in the grocery stores.
No, I know.
The government
I've been to those in Venezuela.
Right. The government runs out of money fairly quickly because their source of revenue is tax money. People don't pay their tax because they're way too high. and people don't have enough source of income to pay these incredibly high taxes, what happens to the government budget? And that's what a lot of DSA socialists, 18-year-olds, 20-year-olds in college nowadays, chanting all this DSA crap, they don't understand that part.
So let me go through the steps in good faith of the government grocery store proposal. The goal is to make food cheaper for people. Okay, we already have a food stamps program. Why don't you expand food stamps so that people can just use the money to buy in the grocery store, people who are just low income? Remember, the government grocery store, anybody can go. So in that sense, even if you're progressive and you want to help the poor afford food, you're actually helping the rich too. Why don't you just give money for food stamps? That's the guess number one, the signal number one, that this is not about helping the poor, but about controlling the people who buy. Number two, they say that it's going to be 30% off market prices. Okay, so who's going to pay for that 30% gap? The government is going to pay for it, so the taxpayer is going to cost all of us money, including the poor. Oh, well, we'll tax the rich. Okay, we'll tax the rich. 30% cheaper. If something is 30% cheaper in East Harlem in the first government grocery store that's going to open there, I've already been to the location and made a video there. What do you think people in the community are going to do? They're going to go into the government grocery store. They're going to buy all the food, especially fruits and vegetables, and they're going to sell them in the street. Oh, they're not going to do it. People already sell food, fruits, and vegetables in the street in New York City. What are you talking about? They sell that right next to the place where they're opening it. It's going to be so quick. It's never been quicker to resell something than in this location. And what are they going to do? Prohibit you? Oh, so then they're going to ration what you buy. Another control step. And so this is all the supposed gains from this government grocery store are not going to go to people who need it. And it's going to cost us so much money because the government that owns the store has no incentive for it to be like a Walmart or like a Costco. There's a Costco actually very close to the place. Costco or a Bodega or a Walmart or Kroger, they have an incentive to have the things you want in the store because if they don't, they lose money and they go broke. If the government grocery store does not have the things you want, in the quantity you want, in quality that you want, at a low price, what happens? Nothing. Nobody's going to get fired. Try firing a government grocery store clerk. What happens if the clerk treats you badly? You can't fire government workers like in the private sector. So the store is going to lose so much money, not even because of the 30% discount, but because of the structural incentives. And it's all going to be paid for by the taxpayer.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And when, you just touched on something, and that's government control. Yes. That's, at the end of the day, that's what every communist regime wants to instill. And when it comes to, for example, government control, we can think about the tax that they just implemented on property owners who have property over $5 million, whatever the figure is. And somebody who I respect a lot is an entrepreneur, investor, and he's, fairly very successful, Scott Galloway.
Oh, yeah.
And Scott Galloway
last night. I listen to him
night,
a lot, too.
Yeah. He's great. I think we all should. And Scott Galloway last night came out saying, he had a podcast video where he said, I don't know why Zoran would publicize my home address, my information, my personal contact. He kind of sounded the alarm that him and his family, his kids, we're all getting doxxed already by people that don't have the amount of money that Scott Galloway does. And this is, me personally, I'll say it, this is something that I remember seeing in Venezuela. My dad worked for an American company, and he was actually kidnapped in 2001 by the very own people under the communist regime. That is the reality of communism, right? It is to drive out anybody that can persuade or stop the government from being a tyrant, drive them out of the jurisdiction so that the government can ultimately have even more control over that jurisdiction. And that is something that we're seeing play out in front of us here in New York City, and we don't even realize that that's the intention behind it.
Well, I agree that this is all very tragic. I'll say I don't actually think Mamdani's goal is necessarily to drive them out. I think the socialists and him specifically resent successful people. I think he resents Scott Galloway. He resents Ken Griffith. Scott should have taken notice when Mamdani went to Ken Griffith's apartment. That was the first signal that he was going to just dox everyone. And he did a video there, and then he just showed it's over 900,000 properties that they put on the list. It's not a small number; it's a huge number too. It reminds me actually of in Venezuela after your father was kidnapped. They did. Have you heard of the Lista Tascon?
Mm-hmm.
So when there was a recall referendum on Chavez, the Minister of Communications published a list of everybody who signed against Chavez, and your name was public, and then you were barred from government benefits and government jobs. That is the socialist strategy. And with the rich, they just hate that they're successful, so they do want to dox them. They supported Luigi Mangione, remember, killing a CEO. They celebrated it. These people would celebrate if Scott Galloway was killed for his wealth. They would celebrate if Ken Griffith was killed for his wealth. And who knows, maybe they would even do it themselves.
And that's actually something that Scott Galloway himself brought up
really?
in the interview yesterday. He said, this is right after a CEO of a major company was killed in broad daylight here in the city. And now they're doing this to other CEOs of other companies. It just goes to show that there's no line, there's no boundary that they wouldn't cross to jeopardize the people that don't agree with them.
And Pedro, this speaks to the need of the American elite of stepping up, putting up their pants and saying, we're not going to allow America to become a socialist country. Because it would be such a shame if America becomes the first country in the world that becomes socialist because it's the rich that voted for it. Because everybody tells me, well, but the Marxists have usually been from elite backgrounds, and Mamdani is elite, and, and Lenin was like that, and Mao too, and Fidel Castro. Yes, the politicians in every country in history have always been elite to get there. But the supporters, that's not always been the case. Certainly the supporters of Hugo Chavez or the supporters of Castro or the supporters of a lot of these movements that came up were actually poor people and farmers and things like that, and the proletariat, certainly in Venezuela too, and in Latin America. But in America, it's people who are more highly educated and have upper middle class jobs that are voting for this. In New York City, the people who voted for Mamdani were the people who did not live in rent-controlled or in public housing, were the people who lived in market-rate housing. Mm-hmm. Most people don't know that. It was not even blacks or Hispanics. It was highly educated whites. It was young people, not old people. So how do we ensure that the next generation does not fall prey to this idea? That's the real challenge.
Yeah, and I think the bigger challenge is realizing that communism doesn't become communism at first. There's no communist revolution necessarily. In Venezuela, it was socialist. Here, what we're seeing in the United States, in New York City, in Seattle, even in Michigan, which we'll talk about in a second, it's a socialist revolution.
Right.
But once that government is in power and voters realize that they made a mistake, it's too late to go back.
That's right.
Because the government has way too much control for their own good.
Hassan Piker said it. If we win, this is going, like in Michigan and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, he said, the Republicans are never going to be able to go back into office. Is that a threat? Does that mean that they're going to rig the elections? I mean, Mamdani himself in 2013 praised the Venezuelan election system, Pedro. Said that Venezuela would be a good election observer. The only charitable way I can interpret that is that either he's an ignorant, and actually, because I know that he's a really smart guy, highly educated, with good family, I know he's not stupid. Therefore, it must be he wants to rig the elections eventually. That's the socialist agenda.
Of course he does, because he has a lot more power-hungry ambitions than he reveals publicly, and that's something that people have to start waking up to, without being woke, of course. But but one thing I wanted to touch on is, Carlos Jimenez made a great point the other day. Representative Carlos Jimenez, he escaped communist Cuba when he was a kid, and now he's one of the most high-ranking U.S. congressmen, former Miami-Dade County mayor, which, by the way, Miami-Dade County, that's where my family lives here in the United States, has the largest Republican Party in the country.
Really?
Over 400,000 registered Republicans. Wow. And I can assure you that a large demographic in Miami-Dade especially, survived communism, whether it was in Cuba, Venezuela, Nicaragua, or even the Soviet Union. The list goes on, but they all vote Republican. They refuse to trust socialist politicians like Zoran Mamdani because they've seen it before. They've experienced it before, and they will never vote that way. But that's went off in a little tangent there, but that's disregarding the point that Zoran puts on a smile, right? He puts on a smile. Abdullah Sayed is doing this in Michigan. He is
nice
deceiving.
TikToks, dancing.
Right. He is appearing to be a populist, and this is the exact same pattern that we've seen before in, all the countries that I just named. And, this is how the politicians, the self-proclaimed socialists, not communist politicians, ultimately rise to power and then instill a communist regime because they, deceive voters this way.
And you forgot also Francesca Hong in Wisconsin, another one that really believes in these ideas deeply, in socialism, I mean. And they actually, want to abolish policing. They don't believe in any of that.
Unless it applies to them.
Yeah, one question I asked the DSA member in my TV interview is, if you want to abolish the police, how do you expect to take my property?
And they can't answer that.
That's because this is misleading. They don't actually want to abolish the police, Pedro. They want to let killers and rapists go free, and then they want to arrest you for having too much money. That's what they actually want to do. They want to become a dictatorship. That's why they want to abolish the Supreme Court in the DSA platform. They want Congress to rule by mob rule. They want the dictatorship of the majority. They want 51% of voters to be able to take the rights of 49% of voters, which is, by the way, exactly what the founders wanted to prevent.
And even the Senate, when we look at the Democratic Socialist agenda, they have abolished the Senate as one of their top priorities.
Because they know they will never be able to win the Senate.
Of course. But even more than that is because they want one voice in the government.
Right.
They want one governing body.
Venezuela abolished the Senate, right? You know that, right?
Of course.
All of these countries abolished bicameralism in Congress because it makes it easier to then pass everything that they want.
They don't want checks and balances.
That's right.
They don't. And when it comes to the Supreme Court, look at packing the Supreme Court. That is a leftist argument. What we experienced in Venezuela was a Supreme Court that eventually had up to 18 justices.
Oh, yeah.
They added 18 justices in one go in Venezuela.
Yeah.
And, well,
Do you know that the president of the Supreme Court, by the end of Maduro's period, he's not there anymore. Pedro was his name too, like yours, but I forget his last name. But very different Pedro, don't worry. He was actually a convicted murderer pre-Chavez. Imagine how bad things can get that the president of the highest court in the land is a felon, and not a regular felon. Not that he went there and shoplifted a little bit when he was a teenager. No, a killer. That is what the socialist regime did. All of them are criminals. Celia Flores, Maduro's wife, was a bank robber. Delcy Rodriguez, the current interim dictator, and her brother are the children of a Marxist terrorist who kidnapped an American CEO for 2 years, like your dad was kidnapped. That's who Delcy's father was. And the apple doesn't fall very far from the tree ever. And so that is where they come from. Mamdani comes from a communist father. Abdullah Sayed said himself that in his community, they mourn the death of the Ayatollah of Iran. So he supports terrorism against the United States and the world.
He supports totalitarianism, even worse. He supports the regime. And not just that, we have Ilhan Omar, one of our favorite subjects here at the Daily Signal.
Oh, I have to tell you a story about this, yeah.
Her father was literally a genocidal maniac in Somalia, responsible for the deaths.
The communist regime of Somalia.
Right, in the communist regime of Somalia, and then we have Ilhan Omar, his daughter, and his granddaughter even, traveling to Cuba to go cozy up to another genocidal regime. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree here.
Yeah.
But I think American voters are missing the point that the apple doesn't fall far from the tree.
One thing I found out about the father being a general in the communist army, because when Ilhan's daughter went to Cuba, she defended her and then defended Cuba, saying that when she was a kid, she had a Cuban doctor. And I thought to myself, wait a minute, isn't Ilhan Omar from Somalia? How did she have a Cuban doctor in Somalia? Because the Cubans sent military aid to Somalia in the 80s when her father was a general, and she had a Cuban doctor because she was a member of the military. I mean, how sick Like the Cubans ruined Somalia too. The destruction of Somalia is also Fidel Castro's fault. Yeah. Isn't that wild? We have Ilhan Omar because of Fidel Castro. Like, look at how far the butterfly effect happened there.
Yeah, the ripple effect from communism goes pretty far.
And now
here.
Cuba continues to train people to destroy America, like Karen Bass, the mayor. So now I know that this quickly can sound like a conspiracy theory. The difference is that it's not a theory, it's just an actual conspiracy by the communists. The real question is, we need immigrants, I think, like us from socialist countries to share this truth with people in this country. Because I've had the chance to, do a lot of man on the street interviews with people who support it. I'm down in New York. And I get some good reactions, actually. It's very interesting when you talk to somebody who is like the median voter, who's not as informed, and you tell them these things and you show them some of the statements that they've made. And they change their mind about the issue. They're like, oh, actually, I don't want to live in public housing. I don't want a government grocery store. I want people to be good. Of course, all of us want everybody to have great healthcare, live in a great family. We don't want people to starve. We don't want people to be homeless. I want that too. I want everybody to be wealthy. Pedro, if you ask me, I want everybody to be like Jeff Bezos, wealthy. Of course I do. The question is how to get there, right? Mm. And our failure on the conservative side is that we haven't put forward as many good solutions. We talk a lot about the housing issue, but we don't do as much, right, to liberalize those regulations. And then, I think the destruction of the family has been a big catalyst for this too. If the parents are not educating the children at home, the school is, and the schools have been taken over. Right.
But that right there, and we'll talk about the family because that's a big, important issue, not just to everybody here in the building, but also to all of our Daily Signal readers. Family values, this is what we're built on. This is what we defend, and this is the hill that we'll die on. When it comes to Democratic Socialists or Communists, they don't want you to have family values. They don't want you to have control over your family at all. They want other people to educate your kids. They want other people to raise your kids. Because at the end of the day, you as a kid don't share the identity of your parents, of your family. You just don't. And this is how the government eventually exercises their control. And I'll share with you a story, but after my father was kidnapped and then released, he was sold for ransom, right? This is what a communist regime does. We tried leaving Venezuela, and they let my parents go. The government let my parents go because they were not Venezuelan nationals, and they were also above the age of 18. But they tried to hold myself captive.
Oh, because of the passport thing?
No, because I was a kid, so therefore I was property of the state and not property of my parents.
Wow.
Or not even individual property. I was just property of the state. I was a tool for the, communist regime to use later on. This is kind of what we see, not to this degree, of course, but this is what we see with Democratic Socialists and the left here in the United States trying to exert control over family values and eventually decentralize the kid from the family. I mean, this is why in schools all across the country, kids can become transgender as little as 6 years old, and the school is legally not allowed to tell the parents that they changed their gender. Yeah. This is...
Pedro, you mentioned the kids not being owned or property or just their parents, right? There's already been an experiment on this, actually, that the Soviet Union tried, and then in Israel that was done more voluntarily. In the Soviet Union, they just put people in rooms together, meaning they mixed families in the same housing unit with the goal of destroying the married couple and the children. This was purposeful. They wanted the husbands and the wives to cheat on each other. It's really sick behavior. But that's what the Soviet Union did for many years. They failed, I'll say. They failed. They did destroy a lot of the Russian family, but they didn't permanently destroy it. In Israel, it was different. The kibbutz system, which was voluntary, very different from forced. A lot of Jews at the beginning of the history of the state of Israel were Marxist. In fact, I know one of them who did Aliyah to Israel, and he moved into this community, which was called kibbutz. There are still a few. Many of them were attacked on October 7th, unfortunately. But
I saw one of them with my own eyes. I was there.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah.
So
months ago.
in the kibbutz initially, most of them, the kids were not owned by the parents. They were collectively educated. They did not live with the family. Like the goal was that it was all collective. You don't work where you want. You work where the kibbutz tells you work. You go to school where they tell you. Everything has to be approved. And so he's now an econ professor at Dartmouth. This man who lived there. He stopped believing in communism after he lived under it. And he said there are two types of people of persons who leave the kibbutz. The ones who are so dumb and futile that they get kicked out, and the ones who are so smart that they need to leave in order to succeed. Most kibbutz, for the record, despite being heavily subsidized by the Israeli government, went broke. Now, most of the kibbutz that are left are actually very successful corporations that make money and are not communist at all. So it's a very interesting experiment. But there's nothing stopping, Pedro, American Marxists from doing what the Israeli Marxists did, which is go form your own kibbutz. Create the DSA kibbutz in the middle of Arkansas or New York State upstate. Go live in there in a community. In fact, we should have some American right-wing billionaire give them the money to set it up at the beginning. Live there, create your socialist society, educate children collectively, and let us be free. You can be a socialist and live in a socialist community in a free country. We cannot be free in a socialist country.
That's right. And this reminds me of the Chad exclusionary zone in Portland, I believe, during the Chaz, that's the name, right? During the BLM riots, where white people weren't even allowed in there, but they were farming.
Do you remember the Family Guy meme with like the skin color scale, whether to let you in? They had the skin color scale to let you in or not.
Yeah, that was their criteria, right? To admit new comrades to the Chaz. But that's funny. And last thing we'll talk about is the destruction of religion, right? The destruction of faith under Marxist rule. That seems to be a pretty universal thing that you can go back through history books and find in common in every single communist regime. They don't want you to believe in God. And here in the United States, we see it closely. They start destroying your faith, your ideology. And the reason is, and we can say this, the reason is they want you to place the government as your higher power. And when we come here to the United States and we see today in American society, unfortunately, young people, especially, the upcoming generations, are losing faith more than ever. And some people are even idealizing politicians, the United States government, different social programs, different social causes, and just society as a whole. And they're losing that faith, right? And this is all part, in my opinion, part of the communist playbook to get you to believe in the government and trust the government no matter what they do. So eventually you look the other way when, they start destroying society.
Well, Pedro, there's not a single socialist politician in America, a self-avowed socialist, that is a Christian, like a real Christian. Find me a church-going Christian leader who is a socialist. Mamdani is not. Abdullah Sayed is not. Do you think AOC is a real Catholic? I've never seen her go to Mass in my life. Francesca Hong, there's none of them. None of them are. And that is not a coincidence. Right? Maduro was actually not Catholic. Neither is Delcy Rodriguez. They believe in this Indian cult leader called Sai Baba. Have you heard of this? There's a picture of them. They go to India very often to worship him. He already died. Actually, Delcy Rodriguez went earlier this year, and she went to work. She even did a video for the cult group, and it's on Instagram. And the whole thing is she wears like the thing on the forehead. It's hilarious. It's not It's not part of the Hindu faith. It's a specific cult. Yeah. And they began, same as in Cuba, they began sacrificing animals. Have you heard of Santeria? Yeah, they dress all in white and sacrifice chicken and other animals. In Nicaragua, they banned all the priests and they expelled them. Most Nicaraguan priests are now living in the United States and Costa Rica. It's very sad. They destroyed the church. They closed the Catholic universities. That's the same as in the Soviet Union. In Venezuela, the persecution against faith itself hasn't been as pronounced, but they have certainly used faith to their advantage. So Chavez, not only was he not an actual believing Christian, but he used Catholicism to his advantage by twisting it. So, for example, the rosary, right? He would make a red rosary with his face instead of the Virgin Mary's. I mean, talk about what's sacrilege or like a violation of the church. That is what they would do.
Because he wants his citizens to put their faith
worship
into
him.
him.
Yeah,
instead,
pray
right?
to him.
To worship him.
Pray to
and that's
him.
all that they are. They are just power-hungry psychopaths, for the lack of a better term. And that's who they are. I mean, I remember seeing a Christmas video from Nicolas Maduro when he was still, when he was still
In power.
reigning over Venezuela, and him talking about the amount of riches Venezuela has, and him showing the buffet of food in his golden palace, which eventually Trump destroyed, thank God. But, and we have 70% of Venezuela literally eating out of trash cans. Maybe not 70%. Maybe the figure's
The
a little
funniest
lower.
moment was when he pulled. There was a blackout that even affected the presidential stream, even in the palace, in the middle of a speech that he was giving on live TV, and the power went out. But then he came back and he was eating an empanada that he pulled out of his desk.
Of course.
So many. Honestly, at least Venezuelan socialism was a little funny. It's Latin America after all. It's not like China or the Soviet Union. We did have plenty of funny moments, even if they're tragic comedy. But the truth is, this is a real threat in America. And it's a real threat that it's not only caused by our internal indoctrination, but it's being pushed by foreign authoritarian regimes. China wants socialism to succeed in America. Russia wants it. Iran wants it. Venezuela wants it. Cuba wants it. Because they know they cannot invade us. So they're trying to destroy us from the inside.
Of course. And they're using, useful idiots, for the lack of a better term, to destroy us from within. And last thing I will say is, for those who say communism is, the kind of the anomaly here, right? That life under communism is bad, but the rest of socialism, watered down variations of communism is good. I can tell you that from experience, that is so bad. I lived for the majority of my life in Puerto Rico, which is unfortunately, a mixture of capitalism and socialism, but the government controls all the means, right? All the basic standards of living. So the only electricity company, the only water company, and I'm saying this because you said the word blackout, and that sparked.
Yeah, there's a lot of blackouts in Puerto Rico.
This reminds me, right? The only basic need companies, utility companies, are owned by the government. And in Puerto Rico, after Hurricane Maria, I will say this, some parts of the island spent over 365 days, a full year, without power, because the corruption is so deep that the agency that manages the power and the power grid is completely outdated. And when they actually did a review of the whole thing, they found that the actual factory that produces the power lines for Puerto Rico hasn't been updated since the 1970s. And this is socialism, right? When you phase out any other market competition, these are the results. The people suffer at the end of the day. Eventually, it costs lives, and it costs people to have to leave the country.
And by the way, we have so much socialism in America, too. We have the Postal Service loses $9 billion a year. Amtrak loses billions of dollars a year. The VA does not provide good healthcare for veterans. The Indian Health Service, the Indians are the population with the lowest life expectancy in this country. And that is not a coincidence. They have all government healthcare. They're all living government property. They cannot buy and sell their homes. They cannot sell it to anybody who's not an Indian from the Indian reservation. We force the Indians in this country to live under socialism. We have a host, the Tennessee Valley Authority, that was created under the Great Depression. We don't need the Tennessee Valley Authority anymore. So all of the things that the government has touched, the federal government here in the U.S., not even talking about a foreign country, public housing, they all work badly and lose money. Imagine if we just had more of that. We're just going to get more failure. We need less.
Yeah, and all the other social programs that have rampant fraud here in the United States.
True.
The Daily Signal does very extensive reporting on this. You could feel free to check us out at dailysignal.org. But, everything that the Cal Doge and all the other state Doge associations are exposing, the Vice President's Task Force on Fraud is exposing the amount of hundreds of billions of dollars that the American taxpayer is losing because, big government doesn't work. And that's what we are talking about here. But Daniel, if you have one more message for American voters, what would it be?
that this country is amazing and that we really need to work together to keep it that way. And that's going to require a lot of persuasion work. And that starts in the family. And then it starts in your friend group. It starts in your community, in your classroom, if you're a student. And that's how we preserve the American dream.
Yeah, this country is the only country in the world that has succeeded for 250 years. And the reason is because there's a constitution that we abide by, that people will literally die for, because there is a government that has checks and balances, because there's a system in place that prevents freeloading, and all of that is under attack. And we need to start fighting back the right way, which is through votes, advocacy, and exactly what we're doing right now. So thank you for taking the time, Daniel.
Thank you,
and thank you everyone for watching. Thank you, Sam.